Hello, YouTube. I thought I'd offer my opinion about Apple products. I'm sure some of you have wondered that or suspected what mine is. Mine is kind of a mixed bag, per se. On one hand, they're really nice machines to use. They really can get the job done really efficiently for not only media work but also productivity. Because you can get Microsoft Word and LibreOffice and all that fun stuff for a Mac. For the longest time, I've used Macs to edit my videos for YouTube, just because I could edit really efficiently with the software that was provided on them, and I thought that was the end all be all. However, now that's changed. You can see this G5's on the floor because, well, I'll leave that for another video. But anyhow, Apple computers, they are what they are. They remind me a lot of what IBM machines used to be back in the day, like the PS2 era, when everything was kind of custom built and proprietary, but at the same time it was really nice stuff. For example, this G5. They're desktop machines. Let's start with that. They've had desktop machines since the Macintosh 2, I think. As far as Macs go. Before that was the Apple II. But the Macintosh 2, I think, was their first desktop machine, correctly me if I'm wrong. So they've been doing this for a long time. And eventually they had things like the Quadras, and it evolved up from there through various 68K chips to PowerPC chips like the 603, to chips like the G3, G4, G5. You're looking at a G5 machine right there. And eventually they moved to Intel. And before they moved to Intel, they were really focused on the hardware and the software. I'd say they were kind of evenly focused on both. The hardware back then was just so nice, especially the G4 and G5s back then were just impressive compared to everything else. And that really made computers like this stand out. And it also made them stand out back in the day, too, with the 68K processors. Although there were other machines with a 68K processor, such as the Amiga, the Commodore Amiga, which were also very impressive. So clearly that chip had a history of just doing well. And eventually, the chip markets kind of consolidated, and Apple got tired of waiting for IBM to produce the next chip, and then they moved to Intel. And there's your Intel machines, which are still aluminum. Now, desktop Macintosh computers. Now, this is from the perspective of a fairly recent Apple computer. This is a G5. And, things like the G3 and the G4, MDD and Quicksilver, and, these G5s. Mac desktops in general are kind of a pain to work on. Like, let's say this G5 had a bad fan, for instance. The only place where I can think of that there's a standardized fan is the power supply. Every other fan in this machine is proprietary, so you'd have to go on eBay and look for a fan that would fit this particular computer, and that I find kind of annoying. Proprietary fans are just stupid. Other manufacturers do that. I've seen Dell do it before. That's the thing. Macs are highly proprietary because of what they are. They're custom designed from the ground up, pretty much. The other thing to note about these is that they are farmed out by, at least the boards are farmed out by a company called Foxconn, and they're the #1 seller of motherboards and stuff in the world because of their sales to OEMs and things like that. Apple uses Foxconn, and so do companies like Dell and HP. I mean, they're the big manufacturer. So you're kind of getting the same thing no matter what you buy for boards and the hardware and all that stuff. I mean, really the board, which is the heart of the machine. So in that aspect, you're not getting anything that's much different, except for the fact that this is custom built for Apple. Now that's from a consumer perspective. From an IT perspective, I think Mac desktops are a pain in the ass to work on. as compared with other machines, especially things like the white Intel iMac. That thing, I never want to work on one of those again. There were just little bits of foil that protected the screen and grounded it, and there's just so many fiddly little things you have to mess with I don't like. That's where I think in the Windows box world, things are a little bit easier, is the fact that the parts are more universal, like fans, for example. Proprietary fans I just think are just one of the dumbest ideas in the world. And for example, I think the best example of them being more universal and just just PCs being a little bit more flexible this way, is this so-called Acer machine here. This is an Acer case that I stuffed my own board into. So this thing was a standard form factor that I could swap out. That you could never do with any Mac. You just can't do that. And that, I think, gives the PC world a little bit of an advantage. Not everybody does that. People like Dell like their proprietary connectors and stuff still. For example, the front panel connectors on these old Dells here, and sometimes the fan connector on other Dells. For example, the Dell Dimension C521 I used to have had a 5-pin fan connector, which is just weird. And the Dell Dimension 4600 that I have has it's a 3-pin fan connector, but the way it fastens in is different than most fans. So I don't know. They do stupid stuff like that all the time, and it's just irritating. That's why I'm biased as far as desktop computers go towards custom builds, because you can put whatever you want in there, and it's usually very standardized. Apple's desktops are the complete opposite of that. So you kind of have to just take it for what it is. These are a pain to work on. So a lot of Apple computers are a pain to work on. So are some of their laptops. But like for example, the PowerBook G4s and the early MacBook Pros have like 10 million screws that take you an hour to remove. Things like that. But that being said, their laptops, I think, are where they shine, because in a laptop, proprietary stuff, it really isn't that as much of a big deal as it is with desktop machines, because people like Sony make VAIO computers, both desktop and laptop, that are just as much of a pain in the ass to work on. I mean, they're maybe not as much as some of the early MacBook Pros and PowerBook G4s, but they're still kind of a pain to work on. That's just the general rule with Sony and Apple, is that their computers are a little bit more annoying to work on than the norm. Of course, that depends on the design entirely, not always on the brand, but that's just a few examples. So, from an IT perspective, Apple laptops are a pain to work on, just like Sony VAIOs are. They are just a pain to work on. I don't think every Sony VAIO is a pain to work on, but some of them really can be. Same with some of their desktops. But Apple's laptops are pretty darn easy to work on. There's a bunch of screws on the bottom. At least now they are. They didn't used to be. Like I mentioned before, the PowerBook G4s and the early MacBook Pros just have so many screws and just fiddly things to mess around with. Whereas this, you take off the bottom cover and there's your hard drive, there's your RAM. Done. And your board and battery and all that stuff. So it's much easier than it used to be. Although you still have to get proprietary parts in some case. Like, for example, if your battery goes flat, you have to buy a new battery. If your board goes bad, you got to get a new board. And usually if you're not a certified Apple technician, you got to take it to Apple and pay an exorbitant amount of money for that to happen. That's where the downfall of IT work on Apple computers is concerned, is that it's just a lot more of a hassle. Whereas with, let's say, an old Dell, you can just go on eBay and be like, hey, here's the motherboard I need, buy it now. So as far as IT goes, Macs aren't really my favorite. But for use and for the benefits you can get out of them as far as software and stuff goes, they are excellent. And why do I use them? For the software that makes them valuable. I'm not a fanboy. They're all these over here, they're all just freaking computers. I mean, the Mac versus PC stuff should have ended a long time. The Mac versus PC stuff should have ended when PowerPC, when they switched from PowerPC. Like, really, that was the last time they were any different than any other computer, as far as what you could do with them goes. Now that they're Intel, you can do pretty much the same thing with these as you can do with a Windows machine. In fact, you can put Windows on these, so in fact they can be Windows machines. This one has Windows Vista and macOS 10.8 installed on it, so it's a dual. That's why I like Apple laptops too. They can be dual-purpose machines that way. For the software that you want to use on them. This thing was actually running a Linux Mint 11 at one point, so it's seen a lot of software action in its life. And in that aspect, this laptop has been very flexible. Not hardware-wise, but software-wise, it has been extremely flexible, and I really like that. Their desktops, not so much, but at least with the ones that I've used. Of course, the G5 is a bad example because it's not Intel, but this is before a time when Apple's computers became more flexible. Apple switching to Intel made their computers much more flexible, and for me, back in the day, running Windows natively on a Mac was kind of, like a pipe dream, but when it became reality, it was exciting. It was really exciting back then. But in the end, it just made them a more flexible machine, and I really like that aspect. Plus, you know what you're getting. You look at the specs on it, and it's exactly the same as another PC or Windows machine of the same caliber. So, you know what you're getting a little bit more. With PowerPC, it was sort of, you had to rely on, you had to look it up. But still, my favorite Macs were from around the year 2000 to 2006. These G3, G4, G5 era Macs are still some of my favorite that I highly regard. I like these a lot because they were so special back then. And I remember what it was like back then to use these. It was nice. Whereas now using a Mac is kind of like using everything else. It's kind of the same because it is what it is. Because of the whole Intel thing. But it makes them a little bit more useful of a machine these days for them to be Intel. So that's fine by me. And there you go. That's a lot of rambling, guys. As far as Apple goes, I'll sum it up for you. From the view of a consumer of Macs, they're nice machines. They really get the job done very well, and if you have good luck with them and you get your money's worth out of them, then it's all hunky-dory. But from an IT perspective, I really don't like working on Macs. I just don't. I like using them. I don't like working on them. So there you have it. As far as any fanboy stuff goes, I think being a fanboy is just being ignorant. So it's not really meant to convey any of that. So if you are a fanboy, get rid of your ignorance. They're all computers. Seriously. Anyhow, guys, that's my opinion on Macs. I like them, but I like them, but I don't. It's a mixed bag. I like using them, don't like working on them. But a job's got to get done, so you got to do what you got to do anyway. So there you have it. Anyhow, enough talking. Have a good one, everybody. Ciao.